All right. Ed, Layla, how do I know if I'm live? Because I can't see. I can only see.
We're live now.
We might
All
be.
right. Shouldn't have said that. My fault. Oh, God, you can tell I've never done this before. Right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the very first LDDA hustings. I'm sure you will agree that we've got two great candidates in Layla and Ed. And I'm certainly looking forward to hearing what they've got to say on disability. There'll be 3 minutes of opening statements. Layla will go first, and then we'll alternate, starting with Ed with the first question, and it will go like that. Each question, the candidates will have 2 minutes each. Before 30 seconds before the end of your 2 minutes, I'll put my hand up to say you haven't got much longer, and then it'll go to the other one, or I'll ask a next question. We have got lots of questions. I'm hoping we'll get through them all, but apologies if we don't. I'm really going to try and get through them. Right, with that all over, Layla, would you like to start your opening statement?
Well, thank you so much, Gemma, for hosting. I'm delighted to be here with you this evening, and thank you all for watching. And I want our party to be at the forefront of building a more equal society, one that embraces and celebrates diversity and where human rights of every single person are protected. And the rights and needs of members and citizens with disabilities has frankly come up far too little in this campaign. So I am so glad that we've got this opportunity to focus on such an important subject that matters to so many. When I was a teacher, I saw firsthand how children with disabilities were held back in schools by situations outside of their control. As an MP, I see the wider scale of this discrimination across society. And as your leader, I will fight for everyone's right to live an independent life, free from poverty, ignorance, and conformity. This deep-rooted inequality that exists in our society, in our everyday lives, disadvantages people living with disabilities in every stage of life and in so many ways, from appalling, inaccessible transport systems to houses being built without thinking about different needs, to benefit systems that are so overcomplicated, frankly, that so many people just end up not claiming and get left behind. Every single person in this country must be offered the opportunities to achieve their best, whatever that may be. And we need to hold our government to account, as they are currently failing in so many areas. But to do this, we have to work on ourselves as a party. In my time campaigning, in the listening sessions that I've held with over 300 local parties, I've spoken to members and activists with disabilities, and I have been appalled at some of the stories that I've been told. We can do better, and we must do better. From supporting members with disabilities in getting involved with campaigns and taking part in conferences, to ensuring disabled candidates are fully supported in winning elections and beyond. And I want LDDA to be fully involved in the future of the party, to hold us all to account and make sure that the changes that need to happen are actioned. We need to make sure that we live our values as a party and that we are actively working on improving accessibility from top to bottom. Because how can we claim to represent the United Kingdom if we are not representative of the United Kingdom? For too long, disability has been the poorer cousin of other efforts, and this needs to change. I have a plan for our party and a vision for our country, talking about bread and butter issues like education, the environment, and the economy that really matter to people. But it's also a vision that understands that we have not achieved equality until we have achieved equality all. Thank you.
Thank you, Layla. Ed, your turn.
Gemma, thank you for organising this hustings. It's so important that our party debates issues facing people with disability. And can I congratulate the Liberal Democrat Disability Association for what you do? As an LDDA member myself, I pledge to campaign with you within our party and outside. I want us to be the most inclusive party for people with disabilities, with more elected Liberal Democrats with disabilities. I want us to be the party with the best policies for people with disabilities, so our values of freedom and equality shine through, so no one is excluded, discriminated against, or marginalised. And I want us to be known as the best party for people with disabilities. How do we do this? First, we must be clear on the past. Austerity must not only end, but there must be no return to austerity. Second, we must focus on the future, recognising that if our party is to win again, we must listen to Britain's 13.8 million disabled people. My leadership campaign themes of a fairer society and a more caring country speak to this future. A commitment to social justice, demanding that the rights of disabled people are better realised, ending the pay gap faced by disabled people, ending the hostile environment of ever tighter benefit conditionality. My vision of a more caring country starts with Liberal Democrats becoming the voice of Britain's 10 million carers, crucial for so many people with disabilities. I don't claim to be a disability expert, but I do have experience alongside my vision. First, my experience as a constituency MP for 20 years, helping thousands of people with disabilities. People refused a benefit due to a flawed medical assessment. People denied a blue badge because someone thinks they can walk further than they can. People declined medical treatment because the drug they needed was deemed too expensive. And second, there's my experience working for two disability charities. The first as patron for the Disability Law Service, the second as a trustee for Tourism for All. With Disability Law Service, last month, I headed our submission to the Select Committee's inquiry on equal impact, coronavirus disability and access to services, focusing on the government's failure to abide by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities during COVID. And third is my experience as a father of a profoundly disabled child. My 12-year-old son, John, has an undiagnosed neurological condition. He can't walk or talk properly and has profound learning difficulties. He said, "Daddy," for the first time just a few years ago. Caring for John taught me a lot about special education needs, about access to public transport, about toilets. Campaigning for the rights of people with disabilities could not be more personal. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Now it will be Ed for the first question, which is from Sadie Trent. Access to mental health provisions, as both candidates well know, has been extremely poor during lockdown. How will each candidate champion people with poor mental and physical health? How will they encourage them to integrate into the party, get involved in activism, and to stand as candidates for the party despite their disabilities? Will they intend to reform the party constitution to bring in extra support into this area? Ed?
Well, Sadie, you're quite right. People with mental health problems have had a particularly poor deal during the COVID crisis and continue to do so. During the passage of the Coronavirus Act, I, in the second reading, spoke against some of the provisions which were reducing the duties on local authorities to help people with disabilities and mental health problems. But unfortunately, the government pushed that act through, and the care that needed to be there for some people has not been there. And one of the reasons Disability Law Service that I'm patron of, I mentioned, I put in a submission to the Select Committee's inquiry, is because we worry that for disabled people, including people with mental health problems, the services that they needed to have access to have not been there. And of course, the lockdown and the whole experience of the pandemic has really hurt some people's mental health that was bad before, and created mental health problems for people who actually hadn't experienced mental health issues before. So it is a massive issue. And we as a party must campaign to make sure that the services are there now, as well as in the future as the lockdown can hopefully continues. And you know, I think that's going to need a lot of support, and I would particularly focus on young people with mental health problems. The need to have the people there, the services, the extra resources there, because I think we're seeing a mental health crisis now was bad before COVID. I think it's a disaster now. And you mentioned quite rightly how the party should take this. And if I can broaden it out to all people with disabilities, I do think working with the LDDA, I would like, if I'm leader, to make this a priority. I think we've making progress on diversity in parts of the party, but nowhere near enough, particularly with disabilities. I really think we've got to do more across the party, not just candidates for Westminster seats, but in our party committees, and so on. So I'm very keen to work with you and with the LDA to make that happen.
Layla?
Well, thank you so much, Sadie, for this question. It's very close to my heart. And coronavirus, actually, as we are now seeing, is having an impact on mental health for so many people. But for those who were suffering from mental health conditions before, it's just made it that much worse. And in fact, I have loved ones who are going through the same thing. And what we have to do is campaign to make sure that there is enough funding in the system in the first place. The number of times that I have raised the CAM service in the House, I'm beginning to lose track. I led an inquiry on the Public Accounts Committee into adolescent mental health. And if mental health is the Cinderella service of the NHS, then children's mental health is the Cinderella service of the Cinderella service. It's just not working. And so often the reason why it's not working, frankly, is because it's being done by people who have no real idea about what it's like to suffer with this. And I would argue, actually, I would level the same thing at our own party. I have to say, I have been appalled by the stories that I hear of treatment with those with disabilities in general in this party. And some of the specifics around mental health discrimination in this party are very, very real. We need a shakeup. We need to change ourselves. And it starts by actually changing our entire culture, a culture that is inclusive, that understands that actually, if you have a disability, if you've got a mental health condition, whatever it may be, visible or invisible disabilities, that often they present in very different ways. There is no one pathway. There is no one thing that we should be doing. There are lots of things that we need to do.
Comments to a close, Layla.
And something very specific that I'll just say, but I'm sure we'll cover more of this, is we have to have a requirement for reasonable adjustments in candidate assessments and standing for seats. And that's just one small thing that we need to start with, but it's a huge, huge issue. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Sadie.
Thank you. Second question will be for Layla from Richard Whelan. If elected leader, what will you do to ensure that more disabled people are selected and supported as candidates at both council and parliamentary level in key wards, districts, constituencies, and have the chance to either become a councillor or an MP? Layla?
Yep. Well, thank you, Richard, for this question, because we have to do better at this. Disabled people make up 10% of the population, and yet how many do we have in our various seats, either at council level, in Westminster? We have, even though there is provision under the Equality Act to have all disabled shortlists, we've only ever done it once since 2017. But what we also know is that candidates who have disabilities actually first and foremost are brilliant candidates. They are people who are resilient, they are smart, they should be part of this party in a way that actually at the moment, from what I hear from candidates who do suffer with these disabilities, they are not being supported by the party anywhere near enough. And what I would like to see, first of all, is proper reasonable adjustments made for when you stand for council, when you stand for parliament, where we are training local parties, not just in unconscious bias training, but also making sure that they understand that if there is a candidate who is in, let's say, a wheelchair or has a mobility issue, they aren't going to be able to lead canvassing events. And it's entirely right that we give them financial support, but also other support, building teams around them to make those reasonable adjustments. I hear of candidates who stood in seats at the last general election who paid hundreds of pounds on taxis because there wasn't that inbuilt provision in the party. And I would like to see that change. So yes, money will help to an extent, but I also think root and branch changes need to be made in the party around our own inclusivity. And I would like to see a dedicated fund for this, and us to institute a specific KPI across the party at council level, and also to challenge ourselves at the Westminster level, so that we can have that drive to get more disabled candidates elected in the Liberal Democrats and in our country.
Thank you. Ed?
Well, Richard, thank you for your question. I think there's a whole set of issues we need to tackle. We need to make sure we've got people who with disabilities joining our party in the first place. It's really important we reach out to people from the communities of where there are many disabled people, and we try to make it easy for them to join it and they feel welcomed. And that is the first stage. The second stage is then persuading people to want to become candidates. And you have to sometimes go the extra mile, whether you're a leader, you're an MP or a councillor, to make sure that people feel that they will be supported. And we need to make sure that people feel they will be supported, to put in a whole set of policies. And we just haven't gone far enough. We need an access fund, of course, because we all know that it can be far more expensive for people with disabilities to travel around and to be a candidate of any nature. We need to make sure that there is mentoring, so people have that extra support, particularly people with mental health problems, but all mentoring for people with disabilities. And then the practical support. You know, I think people who haven't experienced disabilities don't realize how challenging it can be, not just to get around, but to campaign, to go and talk to people, to go to public meetings. It can be difficult. And then you've got the media. So we need all that access fund, mentoring, practical support. In my own constituency, we've had a number of people with disabilities who have stood for the council. They've often needed a lot of cajoling and encouragement. As one of my good friends in the Liberal Democrats, a guy called Bob Steed, he has stood for council. He's no longer a councillor now, but he had some real disabilities. So we've got to do across the board. If we're serious about this, we've got to go from membership recruitment to welcoming
Can you
people,
draw your
encouraging them
comments to a close, please, Ed?
because they have the proper support.
Thank you. Next question is from Tim Twelves. Danny Chambers and his Facebook posts caused damaging national publicity during the last election. We don't want you to comment on an individual case. Elder DA shares the view expressed by the BBC article. It said, his purpose in sharing the so-called jokes was to impress some people at the expense of other people's dignity, which isn't the kind of behaviour you would expect or want to see from someone running for public office. Will you sign up to that in future? The party that you lead will consider that Facebook posts made by a Lib Dem office holder or candidate that equate disability with stupidity is considered behaviour bringing the party into disrepute. And anyone knowing selecting such a candidate is also bringing the party into disrepute. Can you say the same for jokes in Facebook or social media generally, mocking race, gender, age, and other protected characteristics? Sorry, it was a long one. Over to you, Layla.
So I don't know about the specific case, or I can't remember it, but the principle behind which this is clearly based on is, yes, this is so bad. You cannot allow this to happen. And I hope that in this case, there was both an apology, but I would also hope that there was offering of training, of understanding why this is so offensive. And when this happens in the party, and it does, and it happens in lots of different parts of the party, I think actually, bluntly, it's too under the radar when it happens in a way that's discriminatory against someone who is disabled. And we don't talk about this anywhere near enough. The general point about discrimination in the party against those who are disabled, whether it be when they're going through selection, whether it be just a joke on, however it was made, it has no place in our party. But the key to it, and I think the way that we get through this, is that we have to appreciate that people are ignorant and they need training. They need to understand it from a different perspective. They need to say sorry when they've got this wrong. And it has absolutely no place. And frankly, if there is a local party that actively selected someone who then was not, did not want to go under training or whatever, and I found out about it as leader, I would want to intervene in that.
You can carry on, Layla.
Oh, sorry, I'm done.
Oh, you've frozen. All right, over to you, Ed.
Well, I largely agree with what Layla said. Language matters, and we need to be careful with the words we use, and hopefully we understand that it is offensive to different people to, in any way mock or undermine people because of their disabilities, their sexuality, their gender, their age. One really needs to, particularly in politics, but more broadly as well, be sensitive to people's concerns and issues. Language absolutely matters, and politicians whose skill and stock in trade is language need to understand that. Now, we also need to recognize that people can make mistakes, and they may not have realized it, or if they did, they need to apologize for it. And we do need, as Layla said, to have training and to ask people if they've made these sorts of mistakes, not just to apologize, but to be ready to go on the training to make sure that they are understanding whether it's unconscious bias or other issues, that they really make sure they do not make those mistakes again.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Avril Collier. Would you defend party members speaking out as a critical friend about inequality of treatment in the party if they spoke as profoundly as Dr. Nagpal did in the first coronavirus APVG oral evidence session regarding disproportionately higher numbers of disciplinary proceedings against diverse members? Over to you, Ed.
Yes, Avril, thank you very much for your question. I think I can basically agree with it. It does seem wrong if people have had that sort of bad experience. So I think the short answer is yes.
Right. Layla?
Of course I would. And the fact that there is this discrimination that happens in society should not be left to those who suffer that discrimination to be the only ones who defend it. And it is absolutely right that I, as leader, or indeed anyone who sees discrimination in the party in any form, doesn't say to themselves, oh, that was bad, that was clearly discrimination, and then they go home and do nothing about it. I know that we are better than that as a party. However, I also know, and Avril and others have been raising these issues for a very long time, we are a party that continues to tolerate this kind of discrimination in our own party. And we need to say that out loud, because by saying it out loud and recognizing that it happens all the time, and by promising ourselves that this will not go back to how it was, and by recognizing we need to change the culture of our party to be genuinely more inclusive, and that when people speak out about something, just because you didn't it for yourself, just because you don't quite understand that that was a microaggression, or frankly in some case it was an actual aggression, just because you don't understand it initially doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And one of the things that I'm very, very, very keen to see is that where you've got in the complaints process someone raising an issue, that they also have confidence in the panel that is looking at that issue. And that's why we need to encourage diversity in all parts of the party. Because if you've got an appeals panel or a complaints panel that is looking at an issue and just inherently don't understand, have any lived experience, has no one in that room that can understand the effect of either words or actions that have led to such a complaint, then of course you end up in a situation
Can you
where
bring
those
your comments to close, please, Laura?
that's one of the key things that I think we need to change in our own party and as part of our own complaints process.
Thank you. Right, the next question is from Emma Griffiths. What will you do to help eliminate discrimination, both conscious and unconscious, against people with disabilities, both in the party and in society? Layla?
Well, I'll build on the answer I've just given. I mean, the first step is to recognize that it's happening. And I have to say, it's not at all something that we talk anywhere near enough about in this party. And I think what it comes down to is we need to ensure that LDDA is well resourced. We need to ensure that there is an active voice directly into the leader's office, directly into the president and the CEO for LDDA and anyone who wants to be an advocate for this, because we should all be advocates for this. So I would say we have to start with ensuring that that advocacy is present. And I would want to talk with LDDA about what more can be done. And some of it may well be, some people have suggested, you know, elevate the status from an AO to an SAO. Frankly, I think actually those terms are a little meaningless in the party right now. Actually, the main thing is that you are an important group in the party and your voice deserves to be heard. But if that's then not followed up by concrete action, and that could be resourcing, that could be training, and I would like to see every single executive member and certainly every single person on a panel having unconscious bias training before they are part of that process.
Thank you. Ed?
I think we've got a long way to go in the party to ensure people understand disability properly and understand the level of challenge that many people have with the disabilities to be active in politics. And that certainly needs training, not just unconscious bias training, frankly. People really need to understand what it is like to be a disabled person or to be a carer of a disabled person, frankly. And, you know, I know just from my own son's experience, the disability he faces. Now, you know, John, because he's so profoundly disabled, it's very difficult when he goes out because he can't speak, he can't walk. But you see the looks that people give him and us, and it can be very hurtful. And I can imagine if you're a disabled person, obviously not with John's level disabilities, but you know, you've got disabilities and people either don't give you the extra time that you need to get your message over, or ignore you, or patronize you, how hurtful that can be. And, you know, I get hurt on John's behalf, but I imagine if you're someone who has all the abilities to stand for office, to make your argument, to get elected, to campaign, and yet you are sidetracked, that is just not acceptable. And surely in society, we want to stand up for disabled people to make sure that they are listened to, that they have a chance, that they can access the services. And if we say that in society and we campaign on that, how much more have we got to do it in our own party? So there's a long way to go, I think, and we need to make sure it is a priority. And I would absolutely want to work with LDDA on that.
Thank you. Next question is from Avril Kolu again. How will you ensure that tackling the climate emergency with a deadline for electric vehicles by 2030, when our country is in economic turmoil, is affordable for diverse groups, many of whom get by on benefits or have low socioeconomic backgrounds? Will you impose this target on users of special access vehicles adapted for their disability, which might have taken ages to save up for, or will you exempt them? Ed?
Well, a really good question, Avril, and something close to my heart. Because my son can't walk, we have one of our cars is a Motability car, and especially for him, for his needs. And it's really challenging to get the car that enables him for us to get him around, that is electric, because as you know, that there are many cars on the market that have petrol diesel versions, but they don't have electric or even hybrid versions. The number of models that are electric are much less. And if you go on Motability's website and look for vehicles that are electric, you'll find very, very few, and certainly few of them that would help someone like John. So I absolutely know from my own personal experience the challenges that we face. But this is the issue, Avril. I'm actually more optimistic than you are. I think we're going to get down the prices of electric vehicles, and we will see many, many more vehicles, the second half of this decade for sure, many different types that will become. So I'm pushing for sliding doors, which are very important for disabled people, to have an electric version. And my experience when I was doing renewable electricity, renewable power, was if you got the policies right, you got the costs down very dramatically. And that's what we need to do. Get the costs down and get the choice up. And that will be great for disabled people and the climate.
Right, Layla?
So I'm a great believer, Avril, in the application of common sense. And it's so obvious that if, and I hope that Ed's optimism is right, and I very much hope that we can get this done for 2030. This is a key priority for not just the country, but also the planet. And very often, you know, cars and public transport are already not accessible enough. And so it may well take longer. And if it does, then of course there needs to be exemptions. There also needs to be subsidies. And we have to, whenever we introduce policies like this, consider the impact that it is going to have on those who are disabled. So bluntly, yes, I do think they should probably be exempt, unless it is very obvious that they are going to be able to afford it somehow. And to the point around, you know, lower socioeconomic background and all the rest of it, that is so true. If you are someone who is living with a disability, or children who are living in households with disability are more likely to be in work poverty, who are more likely to be living in the bottom 20%. That's just a fact in our country. And so whenever we create policies like this, we absolutely need to recognize that the impact on those people with the intersectionality that they very often face is going to be doubled, and we have to protect them.
Thank you. Right, a series of questions from Helen Cross, who's chair of Lib Dem Women. And these questions are from Lib Dem Women. First one, there is a lot of emphasis on growing the green economy. How are you ensuring disabled women will benefit from these jobs? Layla?
Thank you, Helen. So yes, as part of my 3 E's in my campaign, as part of my vision for the country, education, the environment and the economy, I've spoken about how we do need a green recovery after coronavirus. And one thing I want to just stress is, one thing I absolutely do not want, and what I want to push for as leader, is that we use this coronavirus crisis as an opportunity for change. Because normal, going back to any kind of sense of normal for a disabled person, and certainly for those who have intersectionality, who are women and disabled, we know that life before was a life, it's discriminatory. You are far more likely to not have the same opportunities as others. It's utterly unacceptable. And these deep-rooted inequalities is exactly why I'm in politics. This is what I want to champion and challenge. And we have to make sure that we don't go back to how it was before. And part of that green recovery will mean, hopefully, continuing to allow people to work from home. I've called for a legal change in the law so that those who have been working from home and can work from home, the default position becomes that if you want to work from home, you can. And I think one thing I've heard from those who I've been speaking to with disabilities, who through this period have found that actually the world has suddenly become ever so slightly, in some senses, more equal. Their employers have realized that they can make these kinds of accommodations for people and they are still productive. And that is a good thing. So I think there are positives to take from where we are now. And that is one of the changes that I advocate for. I brought together the book Build Back Better before the leadership election started. And it's looking for those chinks of silver in the clouds through this pandemic. And I think that could be one of them.
Right, next question from Lib Dem women.
Hold on, I didn't get a chance to answer that one.
Oh, go quickly, because we have got a lot of questions, Ed.
Yeah, but I didn't get a chance to answer it.
But you should get a go.
I think it's trying to
Hang
go.
on, hang on. Public transport is often designed around commuters at the expense of the kind of community-based journeys women make, often for caring responsibilities. How do you propose we design our public transport system for disabled women and other disabled people? Ed.
Well, thank you, Gemma. Let me try and answer both those questions from Helen, because I think she's quite right to bring up the issue of disabled women, both in terms of public transport and in terms of the green economy going forward. On the green economy, I've always thought that a proper green economy is actually a more caring economy too. In the real world, we've got to make sure that as we move from the old style economy, it doesn't just get greener, but it also gets fairer, and we have social justice. That's one of the reasons I've campaigned for climate justice. I really think it's important that as we build a new society, a greener society, that people are treated fairly, whatever their disability or their gender. Helen, to be honest, I'm not sure if I've really thought through that intersectionality with respect to the green economy beyond the home working point that Layla made. But I really hope that in the greener economy, we will feel able to employ people for whatever their backgrounds. We've really got to make sure employment discrimination is reduced in that. On public transport, well, accessibility is absolutely key, as is safety for women. People need to feel both safe and feel that the transport is accessible if they're going to be able to use it more in the future. So, you know, I hope that answers your question, Helen, but I'd actually be really keen to hear your ideas about if there are specific things that need to be done for disabled women, whether it's on public transport or the green economy. It's not an issue that I've thought in enough detail about, and I'd really welcome some input from you.
Okay, sorry, Ed. Layla?
Well, and I'll be quick, and hopefully it will mean that we get the same amount of time overall. And Helen, thank you for your question. I mean, the general point around accessibility, I think we could spend an hour talking about accessibility of public transport in of itself. I don't know, Gemma, if there's more questions on these. I've worked with constituents of mine here, fighting bus companies to make sure that the dimensions of wheelchairs are properly communicated to bus companies. I went to go see the minister over this one because I was so incensed that my constituent wasn't basically able to get on buses at all because of this. As to the specific point around women and accessibility to public transport, actually, Helen, I want to understand that more. The thing that comes to mind for me is that women very often have their own caring responsibilities. There are many women who are carers and also disabled. And when you go on a bus and you yourself have only got that tiny space where you might have to sort of be taking on a buggy, but you also need to have the seat that goes down because you need some support as well. If you're going to a train and you want the ramps to come down, but you've booked your ticket, you've told them that you're coming, and then they don't show up. You know, all of these things are just compounded together when you face these kinds of intersectionalities. But I would love to know from you other examples and how we can better tackle this. And the last thing I'll say is that I know it's been a while now since the Federal Policy Committee looked specifically at policy specifically to do with disabled people. I would like to see that come back, and I would ask them to consider holding a new round of policy development work with LDDA at the front.
Gemma, can I have a second go, as I only had one go?
Yeah, go on. Sorry, it's my fault. Go on.
Thank you, because it's occurred to me, one thing that I've got some experience from the renewable sector is actually the ability for these new energy companies, these new renewable energy companies, to have many more women involved. One thing I did after I left government, I joined a body called Powerful Women. And Powerful Women is a sort of not-for-profit, and our objective is to get more women into the energy industries. because the energy industries traditionally have been very male orientated. You know, the oil and gas companies, engineers, and they just really have excluded women outrageously, actually. And we haven't had enough women going into it. So the purpose of this organization I'm involved in, I'm on the board of it, called Powerful Women, is to try to promote women and give them support and mentoring and funds, and try to force companies to adopt much more gender fairer policies. And we've really noticed in the work we've been doing across the energy sector that these newer companies that have a much more open, undiscriminatory approach. So there is some hope there. And one thing I might do, Helen, with you, maybe offline, is to work out how, through Powerful Women in the power sector, the electricity sector, the energy sector, maybe we could get that intersectionality together and think through how you could get disabled women in particular, or maybe even Black women, bringing those different diverse issues together to try to help people.
Thank you. Sorry, Ed.
Okay.
Right, third question. How can the Liberal Democrats have more representation among candidates and within the party for disabled women? Layla?
Thanks, Gemma, and thanks, Helen. And I think actually a lot of this comes back to our core liberal values. Because if we appreciate that everybody's different, and that you need to ensure that every person in the whole of society is given every opportunity to live life as they choose, to have the security to thrive, then we need to live those values in the party as well. And we know, and I know from my own experience as a woman in the party, that actually we do face discrimination in its own right, and you get asked absolutely ridiculous questions in hustings and selections, and it's improved with time, and it's improved thanks to organizations like the Campaign for Gender Balance and Lib Dem Women, and over the years I've been involved in all of them. And to those women in the party who have that intersectionality, who are also disabled, what we have to appreciate is that it's a double whammy. There are attitude problems that mean in the party itself, if they are asking for accommodations, it just becomes, oh, it's a bit difficult, isn't it? And it creates that negative impression of someone who is smart, of someone who we should be wanting to be elected, because look what they would bring to the debate in this country. Look how many people, 1 in 5 people in this country at some point will be part of this community. Actually, they need to be represented in all parts of the party and in all parts of the country. And yes, it's about money, but it's also about attitude. Stop seeing reasonable adjustments as being something that's the fault of the person who needs those reasonable adjustments. Actually, a reasonable adjustment is what it says on the tin. It is an absolutely reasonable thing to do to ensure that a human being is able to fulfill their whole potential.
Thank you. Ed?
Helen, I don't know in the party if there's been a discussion that's gone into this issue in the depth that it clearly needs to. You know, you've got Campaign for Gender Balance and Liberal Democrat Women, as you know. We've got the Liberal Democrat Disability Association. For that matter, we've got the Liberal Democrat Campaign for Racial Equality. Is it worth us, maybe you can tell me if it's already happened before, but getting people around the table to think through these intersectionality issues, and whether both within each organization and between them coming together, we can work out what the best practice would be and maybe find some way of giving that extra support that is clearly needed when people have got that extra, those extra barriers to get over. So I think it would be a really helpful thing if we could do that, and something that I'd be very happy to talk about after the campaign.
Okay, thank you. Right, the next 3 questions are from Catherine Macy, representing YL. How can we make conference and therefore our policies more accessible to the whole party? How can we build back trust with people with disabilities? And do you both agree that carers allowance needs to be extended to students? Ed?
Well, carers allowance to students, yes, but carers allowance needs to go up. One of the things I've been campaigning on in this election for a more caring country is that we need to give carers a much better deal, and that will be part of it. I think we absolutely need to build back trust with disabled people, and the best way of doing that is to have the best policies for people with disabilities and go out and campaign on them. As I said in my opening remarks, we've got to focus on the future. We've got to make sure that people see us as the party, the best party and the best unknown party for taking out and delivering on campaigns for people with disabilities. And Catherine, I'm just forgetting, can you remind me of the first question? Because I've gone backwards, confused myself. What was the first question, Gemma, that Catherine
Sorry,
asked?
it's all right. Hang on. How can we make conference and therefore
Conference,
our
yeah.
policies more accessible to the whole party?
Yeah, well, two things on that. First of all, we've learned from Zoom how we can bring people from all around the whole country, and indeed for people living abroad who are Liberal Democrat members can take part. And clearly with people with this accessibility issues and indeed other disabilities, Zoom and online and video conferencing could make a real difference. So we need to really make that a standard, normal approach. And we're going to learn a lot, I hope, from this year's conference, given we're going online for the first time, and how we can ensure we keep that increased accessibility together and in the party as we go forward. I'd add one other thing, which I've done as acting leader. I went to the Federal Policy Committee and I said, look, we need to be thinking about policy post-COVID. And I don't want just another working group. I want to think of a new way of doing it. And we've now piloted, I think nearly 3,000 members have been involved, something called Policy Lab. And Policy Lab is an online platform to enable party members, both in their local parties, regionally and nationally, to have well-structured debates about policy. So that is something I've already done as acting leader, to use technology to make our policy debates and discussions far more accessible to people, to all members, including people with disabilities.
Thank you. Leila?
Well, hello, Catherine, and thank you for the work that you do in YL and your incredible campaigning work. And I so am looking forward to taking forward those policies that you've helped to develop. And yes, conference needs to be more accessible. And I'm actually quite excited about online conference. I've been dying for an online conference since I joined the party, which I think was in 2007 or so. And I remember going, and at the time I was relatively new teacher, wasn't making very much money, and really struggled, actually. I remember sharing a hotel room with a friend of mine and ended up sleeping on the floor, and that was great that I was able to go, but actually that's just not at all accessible for the costs. And if you are someone who is disabled, who also has to bring a carer, you have to pay for another room, and oh my goodness. So online conference needs to stay in some form. And I think we should be running a hybrid style conference where you've got some of it that's online, some of it's not, but fully online voting and accessibility funds for those who want to get there. And to your point around building back trust and carers allowance, yes, obviously, I think carers allowance needs to go up. At the moment, PIP is far too difficult. The way that the benefit system works and how difficult it is to navigate, especially for those who are disabled, it makes my head spin whenever I get one of those cases into my casework post bag. And we have to start by recognizing that for a lot of the same people that we are talking about, yes, raising carers allowance or whatever else, guys, we hurt them badly in coalition. That coalition government and what it did to disabled people, 2/3 of the people affected by the bedroom tax had disabilities. The changes from DLA to PIP have been so catastrophic. We have to start there and realize that if we are going to talk with any credibility about no return to austerity, about a future that is brighter for those who are disabled, we have to start by saying, you know what? That was not good enough. It will never happen again. We've learned from those mistakes and we are moving on and moving forward as a party. And we then can start to build back trust with disabled people. But I think by ignoring it, by hoping that it's not going to come up, by not saying that it was wrong, then we don't stand a chance. And that's where we have to start. And then we start to listen. And if we listen then we will create policies and we will win back that trust and we will win back those voters.
Thank you. Right, the next question is from Gareth Lewis, the new chair of LGBT+. How will you reform and develop social care to ensure people who are disabled and belong to other minority groups have access to social care that respects their identities? Layla?
Thank you, Gareth, and congratulations. And I'm looking forward to working with you in that role. And social care is the specific area here. And you're so right to point this out, that very often, particularly for those with disability, all too often you have to fit in some sort of pathway that is almost computer says no. If you end up having a need that somehow lies behind one of these pathways, if you've got a personal budget that they don't sort of understand, where you've got social workers who themselves don't have enough time, aren't paid well enough, don't have enough training, you know, all of this is incredibly important. And so we have to develop a social care system where people who are disabled and belong to these minority groups actually recognize in an answer, in a nutshell, that they are human. And what I would like to do actually is completely look at how the budgets that go and surround those with disabilities are managed. And that equally applies to social care as well, because there's going to be bespoke needs. And if they need to be increased in terms of those budgets, yes, they absolutely should. And that is one of the reasons why, incidentally, I really am passionate about the penny on the pound on income tax for NHS and social care. And we have to have a social care system that is now fully integrated, comes out of general taxation as much as possible, that we start to implement things like the Dilnot report, so that we then have a social care system that is robust and that is able then, rather than lurching from pillar to post as it is at the moment, just tackling the needs of those who don't have extra needs, it then would allow us to focus on those who really need us, which is very often those who do suffer that kind of intersectionality.
Thank you. Ed?
I think this is a critical question, and I'd say it's partly a question of resources and it's partly a question of training. In terms of resources, I think obviously the penny on income tax for the NHS and social care is a critical part of our party's policy going forward. And I will really fight for that to be kept as a key part of our policy, because I do think social care is dramatically underfunded. And if you look at the unmet needs that aren't even legal requirements on local authorities on social care, and I can list a large number, this is a real crisis for our country. It's one of the reasons I've been talking about throughout my campaign here about creating a more caring country, us being the voice of carers and campaigning on a new deal for carers. And social care and support and investment in that has to be fundamental to it. But I do think people who are delivering care need that support, and part of that support will be through training. Let me give you an example of something I've been involved in. I mentioned in my opening remarks that I've been involved in 2 disability charities, Disability Law Service and Tourism for All. In Tourism for All, we're trying to help people not just go on holiday, people with disabilities, but also try to help the industries, the people who are serving them in the tourist industry, understand different types of disability. And we produced a whole set of training videos to help people understand the many different forms of disability, and how, if you're a receptionist, a waiter, wherever you are in the tourist industry, you can understand and respond to their needs. Because our surveys found that one of the things that disabled people found most upsetting when they are trying to go on a holiday, trying to engage in leisure industry, that people don't understand their needs. And so training is going to be really important. And it occurs to me that this might be an approach we could take in this area in improving social care to people who have different needs and are intersectional with different issues coming together. Maybe that's a way of providing really high quality training that's accessible to many people in the social care sector, and that may be one way forward.
Thank you. Next question from Catherine Fenici. The LDDA represents one of the 5 priority areas of diversity. We do not currently have SAO status. Do you think we should be automatically granted SAO status despite not meeting the membership criteria? And would you help us to achieve that? Ed?
I'm very happy to help you to achieve it. It's not an, I didn't actually know these rules existed. I'm sorry that I'm showing my ignorance now, but I'm very happy to talk to you about it and find out why it sounds very bureaucratic and necessary to me. Given how important disability is, how important it is to us as a party to get it right, to make sure we got much better representation, but also to campaign for the 13.8 million disabled people out there. It clearly needs to have a higher priority.
Right, Layla?
Catherine, yes, I will help you.
Great, thank you. Right, the next 2 are on shielding. First one is from Catherine Tyson. It's quite long. The extremely vulnerable, clinically vulnerable have been given contradictory information about how to protect ourselves now that shielding has been paused. The communication has been atrocious. As an example, the aborted alert system that stated extremely clinically vulnerable should shield until level 1 was reached. Will you advocate for us to make sure that those who are most at risk of death and harm due to COVID should have legal protections not to be forced into dangerous situations in terms of work, school, university and shopping, etc.? Layla?
Catherine, absolutely. And I've been dealing with issues around this from the minute that coronavirus hit and the lockdown happened. And I know that you and I have spoken about this at some length, but it's also others across the country that are feeling the same thing. It was mixed messages. It was knowing that you needed to be shielded, but then you went through a rigmarole of discovering that, you know, if you went to your GP and said, I need to be on the shielding list, and the GP was like, computer says, no, I can't put you on it because we don't know who is. And it was just been appalling. And meanwhile, the mental health distress that this has caused people is absolutely terrible. And that mental health distress part of it, I don't think has been adequately spoken about. And this is some of the things that I am exploring as part of the inquiry on coronavirus that I am leading cross-party right now through recess. We did not stop because it was so important that we started to delve into these issues. Why test, track and trace is nowhere near good enough. That's what we're going to be exploring tomorrow morning. We've started to hear actually that there is a big group of people who are sadly looking like they are becoming disabled because of coronavirus, because they have long COVID, which is not a recognized disability yet, but we are pushing and we are going to be writing to the Prime Minister to make sure that it is. And to your specific point, Catherine, about legislating so that no person who needs to shield is in any way disadvantaged through this time, I think is absolutely critical. And I will 100% take that up with you.
Thank you. Ed?
Catherine, you make a very, very powerful point, and I'm really happy to work with you and on this key issue. I mean, COVID has been very scary for many people, and it still is very scary for many people. It's made them deeply troubled about their existing health conditions, and I've met constituents and talked to constituents who, you know, are beside themselves, worried they can't even go and see their family, they can't go out of their house, and let alone, you know, the idea of going to work. And I think I'm really not sure that our society, our policies, the government, local authorities, the private sector have really caught up with this. And, you know, we really need to take this very seriously. This virus could be with us for a long time. And even if it's not, it could be one, you know, God help us, down the line. We need to really understand this and understand how we need to assist those people whose chronic illnesses often make them even more disabled because of the threat to their health that the virus poses, given their underlying health conditions. So we absolutely need legal protections in a whole set of circumstances. Work is the obvious one, but we may not need to do more than legal protections, Catherine. We may need to look at how services are provided, how care is provided. There's a whole set of different things that I think we need to look at. You know, I would want us, and I would urge government to talk to the charities who've got experience and expertise in this area. You know, whether it's Mind, Scope, you know, all those charities, getting them around the table. Don't rely on experts in Whitehall. I mean, let's face it, we don't want Dominic Cummings giving advice on this, do we? We want real experts, people who people can trust. And this government has lost trust. And so therefore, if we're going to get this right, if people are going to trust the conclusions, we need to get those outside experts. And I think there's a lot of expertise in the charitable sector. And then we can work out how to help people who who should probably still be shielding and who are trying to adapt their lives as lockdown eases. So that's my first thoughts, Catherine.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Falkert Finistra. How would you support disabled people who have been shielding, who are going back into the community to find all sorts of issues with A-boards, chairs, tables, and even cars on the pavement? They can't enter shops and businesses, etc., because of the one-way systems, which are inaccessible. Ed?
Yes, another big issue. I mean, some of the issues that you raised there were issues before COVID, of course, and before people have been shielding. Now, I've worked with a number of our local disability groups on things like A-boards, and I've worked with guide dogs on these issues, because if you've got problems with your vision, as well as problems with your mobility, these sorts of obstacles on the pavements, on the roads, can be hugely problematic and cause people real problems, make them scared from going out. And so I think some of these are long-standing issues, if I've understood the question right. But I'm sure with COVID, with the people who've been inside for months because they've had to shield, it must make it doubly more difficult. So I think we just need people and we need policies to make sure people are more sensitive to all the challenges that people with the range of disabilities that there are, that make them more sensitive to the challenges that they face.
Layla?
So this reminds me of, and this is, you know, a tiny glimpse that I got into some of these issues. In my early 20s, I jumped off a stage and broke my leg so badly that I was in a wheelchair for 4 months. And it's in fact how I started teaching. And there were all sorts of frustrations, from the disabled toilet that actually the wheelchair wouldn't fit through the door of, because they managed to install the toilet but didn't think about the width of the door. And I'd go to the cinema and there was just this rigmarole of if I couldn't go and see certain films in certain screens because they had said that it was disabled friendly, and yet there was a big step up, so it wasn't disabled friendly. And then they realized they didn't have a ramp. They're like, oh, you're the first person who've ever asked. And this was a fair time ago now. And I remember when we'd go past building sites and they would divert people off the pavement and they'd put a little ramp on there. That was great. But the problem was that actually to have me wheeled down, people couldn't go through the other way. And it was just, it felt like it was relentless. It was day after day after day. You'd go into a shop and you just couldn't live your life independently in the way that I wanted to. And it was a very brief time and my leg healed, but it gave me just this tiny glimpse of what this is like. And I can only imagine that this has just gotten so much worse because of coronavirus, one-way systems. And bluntly, what it takes is for people with lived experience to help to co-create these, who are asked the question, how can we do this differently? And sometimes you can't solve all the problems. We know this, you know, it's not always possible. But what upsets me is when people don't even try, they don't even ask for how we can solve the problem. They don't even think that the problem exists in the first place. And that fundamentally is what we need to change. And actually, if there needs to be legislation that is put in place to fix this, I would love to work with LDDA to understand what more can be done. Is it spot checks from councils? Is it just frankly more awareness, whatever it is? But it absolutely is something that I'm very, very keen to fix. And that teeny tiny time in my life where it affected me on a day-to-day, I cannot imagine what it must be like now.
Thank you. Question from James Spivey. Apologies, James, if I got your surname wrong. The COVID crisis is having a disproportionate effect on disabled people. What do you think the government should do to help disabled people who are socially isolated during these difficult times? Layla?
So I'm really worried about this because, of course, first of all, you are more vulnerable to catching coronavirus if you have certain types of disabilities. Of course, this isn't everybody, but we need to be very aware that unless we have proper support in place for every single person who needs support at this time, then you are not only creating problems because of coronavirus itself, you are creating problems of accessibility for people for the long term as well. And I'm thinking particularly of those who need help at home, who are finding that it's just that more difficult to get to the shops. We spoke about the accessibility issue to getting into shops just now. I'm worried that now that people have gone back to work, that those organizations that are doing such incredible work by helping people to shield will find themselves in a situation where they just don't have the volunteers to do it anymore. I actually spoke to 12 of them in my own constituency today, partly thanking them for the work that they're doing, but also thinking ahead to what's coming next. And it's one of the reasons why I'm such a passionate advocate for things like a universal basic income, because my concern is that it's disproportionately people with disabilities who, unless we put in provisions to make that flexible working an absolute guarantee in our society, who are going to be the ones who are not supported through this, and they're going to be increasingly left behind. So what more can we do? Well, I think raising awareness of these issues is really important, but also pressing the government at every turn.
Thank you. Ed?
It is absolutely right. I think there are an awful lot of people who were already had health issues, special needs, disabilities, and the lockdown has made them far more severe. I think loneliness has crept in, the lack of service provision has made it worse. And so I think there are a significant number of people who are really hurting out there. And the question is, what can we do? Well, one of the things that I'm really proud that the party did was we did an awful lot of phone calls and we did an awful lot of extra reach out to people in the community. Right at the beginning of COVID, I set up the Community Action Task Force, where our local government family worked with people from the voluntary sector to provide guidelines about safeguarding, about health, and gave ideas and shared best practice of what Liberal Democrat community politicians were doing around the country. And there was a whole range of things. One local party set up a radio station to try to help people in their community. But the big thing that happened was lots of Liberal Democrats made phone calls. And they made phone calls to elderly people, to vulnerable people that they knew in their community, and did it with the guidelines that the task force I set up were putting forward. And we've made over 100,000 phone calls as a party. And I just give you that example as something that we've done, but we could do more of, and we could see more of, not just in our party, but across our local communities and across the country, trying to reach out more to people. That's what we should be about. And when it comes to the law and to the government, they've really been poor on this. It's one of the reasons I mentioned in my opening remarks, I've been involved with the Disability Law Service. I'm a patron of them. And we put in a submission to the Equality and Women's Select Committee inquiry, which is the inquiry is called Unequal Impact, Coronavirus, Disability and Access to Services. It's a really important inquiry. and we've put in a submission, and I wrote the covering note on it, because the government has been failing disabled people during COVID, and it's actually broken the law. The government has failed to abide by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities during COVID. They've broken 3 of the articles in the way they've gone about it. And I've shown through my covering letter that the government's breach of the law is very, very serious. And I'm hoping that a select committee inquiry will take that up, and we may be able to see a test case. So you're absolutely right. A lot more needs to be done, but I think we should be part of the solution, and we should make sure that the law is upheld as it should be, and the government hasn't done that.
Thank you. Next question from Martin Cooper. Like many organisations, the Lib Dems have been on a steep learning curve on how to work remotely because of COVID. This has been an opportunity as well as a challenge. What lessons have been learned on the role of technology in broadening access for disabled people to party meetings, particularly in reference to policy working groups and committees, which previously often met in HQ? How would you go about broadening access to decision making more generally for disabled people?
Gemma, shall I go, Gemma?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm passionate about this. This is something I want to champion. I've really thought long and hard about this. What I think we've seen during COVID is a huge opportunity for the party to ensure that people with disabilities, and indeed people who can't come to London across the whole country, can be far more involved. I'm absolutely passionate about this. And I want to make sure that in future, I want to try to persuade the committees that make the rules that any committee of the party, any federal committee, should enable any meeting of its committee to be able to be tendered remotely. That will help people with disabilities. It'll enable people in the north of England, the southwest, people in areas that are more distant from London, to play a much more active role. It will bring our party together. And it's not just policy committees. We've talked about conference earlier being online. I just think we need to grasp this opportunity, because you're right. With all the difficulties that we've talked about on COVID, the technology of Zoom, of video conferencing, has shown that we can be much more accessible, much more inclusive. We absolutely must be more inclusive. We must take the opportunity.
Thank you. Layla?
We can't go back to how it was before. Now that we've seen what's possible, and how long have I waited for people to recognize that you can be more inclusive in this way. And I think the next challenge will be, how do you make it hybrid? Because I think that there will be occasion for people to be face to face, but also to have that other option. I think there also needs to be a developing of etiquette about hybrid meetings, as in you shouldn't be talking to people next to you in the way that you might, when actually that will end up stopping people who are zooming in, or whichever technology that you use. And I think that is something that the whole of society is developing, but that we should be very mindful of in the party. And I think it's really brilliant that LDDA is looking at working with ALDC to bring in this kind of training at Kickstart. I think that's absolutely brilliant. But there's one also very practical thing that I want to push the party to do. And it's worth saying, the general election review made very clear there are distinct roles for the leader and the president and the CEO. And so anything that's got to do with party committees or anything like that is actually the purview of more the president and the CEO. But it's a challenge that I want to set for them. And I think it's a very important one. Because if you are a member of a federal board, a policy committee, whatever it is, you have a responsibility to every single member in the whole of the party to make sure that what you are doing, the way you're conducting yourself, the way you run these organizations is accessible. And I don't think right now we put enough emphasis on the training of members and activists, but I would like to see a prerequisite of sitting on any party committee with any responsibility to other members, that people undergo unconscious bias training. And that's a small first step, could be delivered online, but it would be a really practical step to helping to think about these things.
Thank you. Next two questions from Caroline Fairless Price. Will you campaign to acknowledge independent living as a human right for people living in the UK with disabling barriers. Will you work with user-led organisations to turn that into reality and ensure that fundamental services are available in the community? Layla?
Caroline, the easy answer to this is of course, yes. And I don't think, though, that actually, I'll be perfectly honest, that I have in the past. And I will stand up and say that, not proudly at all. And what I will do often is I'll have something that is inaccessible to one of my constituents. I will write to, and I had a case quite recently where actually they were finding that because of bus cuts, they weren't able now to get in to see their own doctor. And there was this just bizarre, strange situation where they were feeling like they were just cut off from the rest of society because the bus company perversely said, we don't have enough people to be able to make this service worthwhile, and they were starting to cut it back. These are the exact kinds of things that happen and then disproportionately affect disabled people. And yes, we need to be campaigning for independent living, not just to think about disabled people who need carers as being people who are wrapped in cotton wool at home and we send them the help that they need. And actually, no, let's take a liberal approach to independent living, where we ensure that that individual is the one that has the power. They are the one that has the agency, and that the system then needs to bend towards them, not the other way around. There are lots of different ways that this can happen. I've been doing actually some work on this particular point for some time, but I haven't actively campaigned on it yet, and I look forward to doing so. So thank you for raising the question.
Ed?
Caroline, this is something dear to my heart for several reasons. The first, one of my constituents is Baroness Jane Campbell. I think she's a crossbencher. She's Baroness Jane Campbell of Cerberton. And she's very disabled herself, and she's been a huge campaigner for many years on independent living. She was the pioneer of direct payments. Indeed, direct payments really were piloted many years ago in Kingston. And direct payments, for those who don't know, I'm sure many of you are aware of them, rather than the council and local authorities providing services, the individual person was given the money and could decide how they wanted to spend it. And that was independent living, writ large, empowering the person with the control of the budget. And that's what I'd like to see, a lot more independent budgets, so that you could really make independent living a reality. We've had lots of discussion about it to take forward the thinking behind direct payments, but it needs to go much further forward. And if you have direct payments, it just gives the disabled person the real choice. Now, independent living, in my own experience with my son, it has many different meanings. So for my son, independent living would be enabling him to get up in the night, go to the toilet by himself. And I call it toilet independence. And the reason I'm so passionate about that, he's 12 now. I want to finish the point, if I may. He's 12 now. Imagine when he's older and he needs to do it. Is he going to have to rely on either me or my wife? We're going to not be around all the rest of his life, or another carer to take him to the toilet. Toilet independence is my aim for him. And I feel through that knowledge and experience, I want to give independence of whatever it can be for every disabled people to maximize independent living.
Thank you. Right. Question from Kevin Dawes of ALDTU. Can both candidates give an example of how they've supported someone, not a family member, with a disability into work, regardless of whether it was paid or unpaid? Ed?
Well, Kevin, there's quite a few, absolutely, over the years. People come to my surgery. I can't give you their names for obvious reasons, but I have had a number of cases with people who've had real problems accessing the world of work. The support that the job centres have supposed to provide have not been very good, and it's needed my intervention, sometimes with the job centre, to try to make sure their services were tailored, and sometimes even with employers. And employers supposed to make reasonable adjustments, but they often don't. And sometimes people trying to get their rights heard have real problems. And that's one of the issues that we need to think about with disability, both at work and more broadly, is these rights get legislated for, but who's ensuring that they're enforced? And far too often, particularly in the workplace, in employment, rights are there, but people find real problems making sure that they help them as individuals. And as MP, I've had to do that on a number of occasions.
Layla?
So similar, to say their names in the specific stories isn't right, but one organization that I've worked with a lot, and I've always gone out of my way to help, mainly because they used to share the office just next to where my old office used to be, was an organization called My Life, My Choice, which was a fantastic campaigning organization that would talk to me about, issues that disabled people faced in Oxford, West and Abingdon. And through My Life, My Choice, I would very often pick up casework from those who are they're absolutely incredible. And I got to know them and I got to understand the issues that they faced. And actually, usually the first thing that I would have to help them with was navigating the benefit system, which is so tortuous. And we would make our own office very accessible. One of the things that really worried me when I became an MP was to make sure that firstly I had an office. The MP who was there before me actually didn't have an office in the constituency, Tory, par for the course. But I made sure that the office was there, but that also where we needed to make accommodations to be able to go and speak to my disabled constituents, then we did that. And very often we will do home visits if appropriate. Of course, at the moment with coronavirus, that's much more difficult. If we have constituents who struggle to use a computer, we will write them back letters and ask them, what's the best font to write it in? Would you like it on specific colored paper, whatever it is? And it's through the work that I've done to make my office more accessible and to be really, really thinking about that as a first step.
So close, Layla,
That's how I've helped so many others.
Thank you. Right, question from Jack Bell. What can the party do to make sure funding is more available to the organisations that give people with disabilities work experience to get them into work and help them find full-time employment? Layla?
So this is quite similar as an issue. One of the things that I've noticed is that actually there is a lot of discrimination that still happens in the workplace. And before I was an MP, I was a teacher for most of that time, but when I was selected into Oxford, West and Abingdon, I joined the senior leadership team of a social enterprise, and we were a business. And all the way throughout, whether it be when we changed premises or when we were looking through people who were trying to come and work for us, I would champion those disabled people who would put in an application, even though there were some who would say, oh no, we can't do this because we aren't able to make the accommodations that they need. And what rubbish, what absolute rubbish. You should be hiring the best person for the job and then making those accommodations later. And what I saw was that active discrimination, and I stood up against it. And I was very proud that actually I changed the way that company was operating as a result. And we shouldn't have to rely on individuals in companies to be actively fighting that discrimination. And that's when they've had the confidence to apply for the job in the first place. So I'm really, really passionate about this point. And what I know for a fact from my work, from that experience, is that actually a disabled person is not defined by their disability. They're defined by the content of their character. They have so much to offer, and it's to our own detriment if we don't allow them to offer that.
Right, thank you. Ed?
I think there's two ways of looking at this. First of all, there's the legislative route and the rights of disabled people in workplace, which I talked about earlier. But I think the other way I'd like to end on this is about how one supports disabled people to get confidence themselves and to get skills themselves. Because often if someone is, trying to get into the workplace, yes, they may have done some courses at college and so on, but they've not yet experienced the actual place of work. And in my own constituency, I've worked with a number of social enterprises and charities who've given up, you could call it sometimes the old fashioned way of sheltered employment, but it's not actually that. It often can come with real mentoring and so on. And those social enterprises have helped people go through that journey, because it's not just one moment you're at home disabled and then you're next in some office somewhere. It might be that, but often it's a much more much longer and much more tricky journey as people adapt their lives and get used to it, get their confidence and improve their skills. And so I think it's also about how we provide services to enable that to happen. How do we support the social enterprises and charities who are providing those services? And if they're not providing, how can we fill those gaps so that those people are getting that help and support so they feel confident themselves to go for the jobs in the first place? So I think there's that way of looking at it as well.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time and it's now time for the closing statements. I really apologise to those who've submitted questions and we weren't able to get them answered tonight. If we'd gone on a bit longer, we would have been all right, but we've unfortunately run out of time. As Layla started with the opening statements, it's Ed's turn to do 2 minutes of closing statement, and then it'd be Layla. Ed, please, your closing statement.
I hope I've shown you I have the vision, experience and judgment to lead the Liberal Democrats. And I hope I've shown you I have some understanding of disability and genuine experience of the many issues facing people with disabilities, and that these issues are very close to my heart. Friends, let's be the party that fights for true freedom, for human rights, for civil liberties, for every person in our country. Let's be proud to be a party fighting for a fairer society, where that's more affordable housing, better care, fairer benefits. The campaigns ahead will not be easy, given the challenges facing our party. As the Thornhill review showed, things aren't good and there are no quick fixes. There never has been. But just as previous successful leaders of our party have done, I will start by laying firm foundations, building back brick by brick. With me, we can win again. I get quality media cut through, like after I forced a commitment from Boris Johnson for an independent inquiry into COVID. Above all, I'm an experienced campaigner. I'm the only MP in our party's history to win without being a target seat. I've won 6 out of the 7 elections I fought in a seat we never ever held before. While times seemed tough after December's disastrous election, I remember the first nationwide election 11 months into Paddy Ashdown's leadership. We scored less than 6%. But I also remember how Paddy led our rebuilding by campaigning hard, by winning elections. And with 30 years of experience in our party, 20 years in Parliament, I know how we can turn to winning ways. So join the likes of Daisy Cooper, Shirley Williams, back me to be leader. Thank you.
Thank you. Layla, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Gemma, for so ably chairing this. And I know it was your first time and you were nervous, but I think you did a cracking job. And thank you, all of you, for your questions. And I'll start with saying I've really enjoyed these hustings, but it's also made me realize in this whole campaign, when these things have been discussed and in the preparation for this, it's really highlighted to me that actually we don't talk about this anywhere near enough as a party, and we absolutely should. And so I start by promising you that I will continue to work with you all to make this a key platform on which we should be speaking about, and not just speaking about, not just talking the talk. We also need to be advocating and taking practical steps to take action. And I want this because I want a party that itself is living those values. We need to be a reinvigorated, inclusive and welcoming Liberal Democrat Party more than ever, and so often we're not. And the reason why is because this country needs us now more than ever. We are a party languishing at 5-6% in the polls. We have voters who don't know what we stand for. And no wonder we talk about wanting to protect the most vulnerable. And yet decisions that were made in the past make people wonder, well, do they really mean it? And I don't want to think about the past anymore. I want us to think about the future. I want us to win back the trust, particularly of disabled people. And I want us to push forward from those mistakes and build back our strength as a party. And I know that with the right strategy, the right message, and the right leader, we can do that. We need to change the country. But to change the country, we need to change our party. We need to give people a party to believe in and a credible leader to be able to give them those messages. I am that leader. So please, if you haven't yet voted, vote for me and let's move forward together. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. Sorry, Ed, for that mishap earlier.
Don't worry, don't worry. I think you're brilliant.
You have been. Well done.
Thank you all both for attending tonight. I hope the audience has been well informed, possibly made up their decision, helped them make the decision. I know I found it very thought-provoking and interesting, some of which I really loved hearing about how you think LDDA could go forward. Thank you both once again, and I will thank the audience for turning up and watching. And as I said, apologies to those who submitted questions and I couldn't get to. We just ran out of time. If it had been a bit longer, another half hour, we would have got through them. But unfortunately, it was only 90 minutes. Anyway, good night. Stay
Good night.
Safe.
Take care.
And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's true.
Well done.
Well
done, Gemma. All
A
good.
cracking job. Don't you worry. It was excellent.
It was really great.
Well done. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you. How many? I think there's about 4 or 5 questions I didn't do. I mean, I cut one of them really down to just ask the question. So, but oh.